What are you with the packets?
I guess we
Could
do.
we pull that information? Like, could I pull that information?
You can, yeah. I can show you how to do it later.
Okay. Tomorrow?
Later today if you're still here.
What time?
4:30, 4:45, or tomorrow.
Also, can we get something to put hanging file folders in for each 8th grade class?
I already have your stuff ready to go.
I'm not talking about folders, hanging file folders. We can put their stuff in so that they can collect their information.
I think we have that in the office. That's Lozano.
Hanging file folders.
I think so. 3 more minutes. Love it. Hi guys. Thank you.
Bye y'all. I'll see you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow.
Have a good day.
I'm ready.
You ready?
I'm ready to rock.
Take them out, Mom. Get them, Kate Mom.
K-pop.
Kate Mom the bomb. She's redhead. She's a redhead. Come on, she's perfect.
I was when I was little. I was a strawberry blonde when I was little. And then my hair got dark. But yeah.
All right, about 50 seconds. Let's wrap up our scripts, our thoughts.
I'm gonna add a step. A real world step.
So this is a script that I came up with. The first part is what I told Mr. T was his action step, which is you're going to model precisive thinking when moving through a specific task. If needed, describe the procedural gap or what is missing habits. So like I would like explicitly go with the kids and say, okay, this is the part you guys are having problems with. We're going to do a modeling lesson so that you have the best possible chance of doing well. And how we're going to do that is we're going to model replicable thinking steps that students can follow. We give students a clear listening, note-taking task that fosters active listening of the model, beginning with an exemplar, and model to show the exemplar was created using the steps outlined below. Annotation, which we mentioned, making an illustration. Kids draw a picture of what the problem is asking, they have a much better chance of understanding the connection. And then checking for understandings constantly using our aggressive monitoring techniques. So what I did was I created an exemplar script for this gap that we created. I want you to read through the script, and then we'll talk about what you guys came up with, and then we'll see if we can give and take from the script and for a good reteaching plan moving forward. So 1 minute or so to read through the exemplar script. This is what I would do if I were teaching this. All right, so what do y'all think? You want to add anything that you guys had
So-
in your scripts? Go ahead.
Yeah, I just like broke it down to more like specific questions, like question number 1 where it says, annotate each problem making sure the X and Y is labeled properly. It's like, what are the 2 variables? And in this one, it first says a farm raises cows and chickens. So that annotating is also answering my first question, like, what are the 2 variables?
So yours is more guided practice.
A little more, yeah.
Then
But then
he
like
knows that
number
part.
2, I said, write an equation with both variables on the left and the total on the right.
Okay.
Because no matter if it's difference or sum, I can get that far if I've got those pieces. You know what I mean? So then the farmer has a total of 42 animals. Okay, I annotated that. He counts the legs of the animals and realizes he has a total of 114. Total can mean equals, or it can also mean sum. Okay, so then I thought my question 3 starts to go into elimination, but it's also getting specifically to this problem, the deeper issue of like, how are these equations the same? How are these equations different? Both equations are the same because they both have both variables. They're different because one is of the count of animals, one of them is the count of the legs.
So I understand that you're like, basically what you're doing is listing questions that are more kind of guided discourse questions, I think, because you're asking them questions where they have to like kind of explain their thinking, but for the purposes of connecting this particular question with setting it up right. The reason I went like a step by step is to make sure that the teacher has a guide for how he's going to monitor whether or not the kids are doing it correctly.
Yeah, I just.
And then they get more practice.
Yeah, I
later.
was thinking like, if you follow this model that I have is when they do a turn and talk, they'll have the academic language modeled and they can explain it, right? They're not just like, I wrote this. 'Cause sometimes that's what kids do with turn and talks. No, I wrote this, but why?
Right. So what I would add, if you're going to do that, that you would have to be explicit in what you want the kids to answer, so that you can, again, you can monitor that that thinking.
And that was done with this lesson on problem number 2. We did it as a class out loud. Example number 3. I think there's one other one that we probably did.
Sometimes, like, even when I model, though, I'll explicitly ask the kids, like, the next person I'm going to pick is going to explain, what were you thinking? Like, literally, what were you thinking for the next step? Well, I was thinking one of the equations needs to be animals, the other equation needs to be the number of legs. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know, I just feel like you need to explicitly say that or have a child explain that. Because
Well-
otherwise, when they get to problems like this, they're not going to.
Well, exactly, and
No,
that's
like
why
what?
that's why the annotation piece. I'm sorry, the make an illustration piece does just that, because if you ask one kid, that's great, you're going to get that one kid to kind of struggle, and that's great. But if you have the whole class make an illustration, you're going to get a great sense of how the kids understand it. And and being able to explain their thinking.
I just don't know if a bunch of 8th graders would draw a cow explicitly
They
thinking
will.
I'm
I've done it
drawing a
before.
cow with 4 legs
Yes, they
because
will.
it's a focus on legs.
I've done it
Okay.
before.
Oh, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know, because I would
I've
have a
done
bunch of 5th graders with cows that have 3 legs.
Well,
I've done it.
then
Like,
we
they
correct
wouldn't-
them.
you know
Exactly.
what I mean?
Then we see a misconception and
But
then
they
we
all-
correct it.
but they all
But I'm
know.
just saying they'd be literally asking the question of like, why are we drawing the picture? Because we need to make sure you know that cows have 4 legs.
Yeah.
Like,
Exactly. Yes. That's exactly
I'm just
what
saying
you
sometimes when you explicitly
And the
say
8th
that, then
graders
they're
made
like,
that
oh,
connection.
you know, like, oh.
Go ahead, back. Was gonna see something. Oh, darling.
I was
I
gonna
could
say
keep talking.
they made that connection, and we've done illustration before, and it worked. And I thought about doing illustration for this one too. With the 8th graders, sometimes they get lost with the illustrations, like some
That's
of
what I'm saying. That's
Well,
why
like
I
to
would
draw,
just
but it does-
describe
no, but
the
it is-
difference, you know?
But it is very helpful within the time frame. Now you can't just give them a problem and say use illustration, but like guided. What are you saying? Model. I'm saying.
Mhm.
Okay, make an illustration right now, and they'll be able to do it. If you give them 2 to 3 minutes, say taking it by step by
Right.
step.
Right.
Exactly. And that's what this modeling lesson, that's what it does.
Because Palmer, I understand exactly what you're saying, but what you're saying, I did that. The kids, we all have a class discussion. They all know what total means. They all say what is means. They all say what sum means. They seem like they know it, but you give them this problem on an exit ticket, and I have some exit tickets here, and it's like,
Right, that's why we need to be more explicit to be like, write an equation with both variables on the left and the total on the right.
Now, if you have an exemplar that you've done it that way, then that's great. And then you would have them do the exact same thing and practice it. Exactly.
I'm
So,
just saying, break it down a little more. than
Speaking
just
of practice-
annotate and make an illustration.
are you ready? For the sake of time, I would like to just, if you want to add anything to this that Ms. Palmer was doing, like, take a couple of seconds for that. And let's see what that would look like in the class.
where's the exemplar? You got the exemplar.
You can take mine. So like step 4 was now that I know I have an equation for animals and equation for legs.
Now remember, we're focused on aggressive monitoring. The only way to know what every kid is thinking or if they're with you is to, practice that aggressive monitoring. And here's a clipboard, pretending that you have your CD chart on.
Okay.
Hey, this is good. Practice is
Tracking me in 3, 2, 1. Okay, so today class we're going to practice annotating word problems so that we understand what the question is asking. I know we've been annotating word problems.
Hold on a second.
It's 4:30.
I said 4:30 or 4:45. He's right in the middle of a practice.
Sorry.
I'll get you
You
tomorrow.
could pretend to be a student, no?
Yeah,
Come
you
on.
can pretend to be a student.
No, I don't want to see it.
Are you taking
All right,
an
go ahead.
exemplar?
He's going to judge me.
No, she's not.
Oh, please.
All right, today
She already does.
we're going to practice annotating word problems like we did the other day so that we understand what the question is asking. So if you can take a look at exercise number 1 on the board. If you remember, Kayla, about the chickens and the cows, we're going to try that one again because we didn't get it absolutely perfect. Okay, so then we're going to set up our problem properly so we can use our skills to tackle the problem.
Step 1, we have to annotate.
So step 1, we're going to annotate. So I want everybody right now to take about 2 minutes. I'm going to put it on the clock. And I want you to annotate the important words and terms that you see within the problem. All right, go.
How do we do?
What does annotate mean?
What do you want? How do you want us to annotate? Circle it. Draw a picture.
I say circle
Oh,
or
there's a really,
Circle words, okay.
I say circle or underline. We underline most of the time in
Okay.
class.
so there's a
Underline.
really good anchor chart in the bedroom. I think maybe all the math, we should use across math for annotation. So it's like certain, like square for
Square
certain
this.
type.
Yeah, I've seen that.
I like
Mhm.
it.
That's
yeah,
what
yeah.
All right. So
So go ahead.
underline. So I want you to underline important words
First, figure out what the 2 variables are.
and make sure that the X and label and the X and Y,
I'm just trying
and
to
try
help
to
you.
find out what the X and Y is labeled properly.
Yep.
All right, we'll give you a minute to do that,
Okay.
and then we'll practice that. Right?
Yeah. Did you want to check?
I've already have a question right now that I want to ask.
Go ahead.
All right, the question is, so we get into this little thing of like, should we always use X and Y, or like you said, somebody use
Right, W
W
and
and
K.
K. So it's just it's not confusing, but it's just like, I don't know how to explain it.
You should just tell them, like I always
X and
tell
Y.
kids we're preparing them for the real world, and in the real world, people usually use X and Y.
Not necessarily.
But, I mean, you're welcome to use whatever you want, it's just like,
It just comes really confusing with the C's and well, if it was cows and chickens, it would be C and C or
So,
whatever.
my own personal opinion
You know
with
what I
this is that we use X and Y because the people that wrote the algebra book used X and Y. And the reason they use X and Y is because they're the least used numbers on the keypad on the old typewriters. So for the first
oh, yeah,
textbook.
I feel like
And
you
so
told me that.
it's the way they do it. It helps us understand better. It's the way we're used to seeing it. So if you can switch in your head from cows and chickens, because those two are C's, that's confusing. Go
it
to
could be a
X and Y,
constant,
that would distinguish it.
And it probably should go from left to right. If we're talking about this problem right
Exactly.
here.
That's
it's
the other
talking
piece of
about
it. Yes.
Chickens and then cows first. All
Oh,
right.
all right. Continue.
So you annotate
As
from
we annotate, yeah.
left to right for X and Y
Mhm.
for 1 minute. And then I will walk around. You want me to practice walking around?
Yeah. And you're marking the paper.
Yeah.
Good job annotating the cows and the chickens. Okay, very good. Continue. Any numbers?
You drew a picture too, Mr. T.
Let's see, so you can check it.
Good job, Palmer.
She's
Are you
Just
do I
like
get
the
a
mayor
star?
for that,
exemplary student.
Yeah, the thing we were talking about, that's what I use. I use underline for questions and circle for like numbers.
That's what I've been doing too, but there's even more kind of
All right,
standard
tracking me in
version of that.
3,
Have you been in the
2,
schedule and IEPs? It's
1.
just
Thank you, Mr. Mack. So, right now, we're going to do this, and we've done this before too, is I want to make an illustration. So, if we're reading, looking at this word problem, Palmer, can you read the word problem for us one more time?
A farm raises cows and chickens. The farmer has a total of 42 animals. One day he counts the legs of all of his animals and realizes he has a total of 114. How many cows does the farmer have? How many chickens?
Great job. So I want to make an illustration, and I want you guys to draw so we can actually understand the situation of what is the difference between a cow and a chicken. And
What's
don't
the
say it.
important part,
Don't say
right?
it out loud. Yep.
No, I'm just saying emphasize that.
Uh,
What's the important part?
What's the important part? Oh well, the leg. Well, you said legs. You're kind of inferring more than you want to, though, right?
No, I wouldn't say that. I would see if a child knows what the important part is.
Yes.
But we're gonna make an illustration so we understand and have a picture of the situation that the farmer is doing. So think about drawing a cow and a chicken right now, and we'll give you about a minute and a half to do that.
And now when you're monitoring, you're checking for the four,
The legs.
and then you're kind of saying, oh yeah, that's a good picture.
Mhm.
And then circle the, you can circle the legs.
Because I circle the legs.
Do you not know how to draw?
That's it.
Did you go to Miss Lopez's art club?
At least I know you're being
Like on a
authentic.
Right?
Spots.
Well, because it just says he has a total of 114. A total of what? Like legs is all the way at the beginning of the sentence.
Well, yeah, the legs.
Do you know what it
Yeah.
doesn't say 114 legs. Like I would consider writing legs under 114 to properly annotate.
Sure.
All right.
It's like you may
So-
have forgotten it by the
Alright,
time
thanks,
you got
Palmer.
there.
Tracking in 3, 2, 1. Perfect. Now that we've seen our illustrations, can anybody highlight to me what's the difference of the situation? So if we're talking about the actual farmer, what do you think the problem gets
Doing what the
into?
children do all the time.
Mr. Andrade.
The legs, the cows have 4 legs and the chickens have 2 legs.
And we got to this point the other day in class, but not all the way there. So perfect. So we see that we have 4 and 2. So now we want to try to set up the problem properly. So if we're looking at that, we know that the total, Ms. Palmer, what are our 2 totals?
Sorry, which equation are we doing? I don't know if you made
For
that clear.
both equations,
Oh, okay, we're
simultaneously.
jumping right into it. Okay.
Well, 1 second. We're just going to let you try in a second. But if we're looking for simultaneous equations, we're talking about you have how many equations?
I should have 2.
Well, more than one. In this
More
case,
than
we'll
one,
have 2.
okay.
So if you're looking at your totals, what are the 2 totals that we have in this problem.
Gotcha.
42
42, it says total of 42 animals and a total of 114. I think that's legs.
Perfect. So on your paper, in 2 minutes, you should have 2 equations, one being equal to
Perfect.
114 and one being equal to 42, and then the variables on the other side. So let's try that right
So
now
you
for
did that
30 seconds.
perfectly. That's
I
exactly
did
what
that
I
in
wanted.
class. Okay.
I know.
Keep
Oh,
going.
but the
Keep going.
monitoring,
I
the
know.
monitoring is the important part. And so when you see whatever percentage of the kids on task or I'm sorry, understanding, then you can
'Cause then-
adjust accordingly right then and there.
So like now you could choose, are you monitoring just for the 14 or are you checking both equations?
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
And you're
So
not
you
going to
can come back
continue in the
around.
lesson now until all the kids have exactly what you asked for.
You know what I mean? You could come around once to just make sure 42 and 114 are on the right, and then say you're coming back around for the correct equations. Because most kids won't be able to scratch those down real fast. They got the right hand side. You know what I mean?
Well, on the right hand side is the 4x and the 2y.
It's the connection between one equation is legs
Right.
and the 4x plus 2y. That's probably the hardest part of this problem.
I think so.
Yeah.
Because when we talked about it, the example I use is, okay, if I have one, after we got to the legs part, we said we didn't do the illustration. So how many cows, if I have 1 cow, how many legs do I have? If I said
But
4,
then
if I
how do I
have
put
2,
that in an equation?
if I say I have 2 cows, how many legs do I have? 8.
And you can even
Skip
go
count.
you can even go a little bit further and say we're going to do the first equation. I'm going to come around. Set it up.
Yeah.
And
Or-
then I
Same,
tried
you
to talk
can
about,
chunk
I
it
think you might have
however
been
you
there for
want.
that, we talked about repeated addition as multiplication, but they
Mhm.
don't always grasp that in the terms of something like this,
Right.
Totally.
where it's 4x,
Right. So
you know?
when I was in your class,
Well, because there's not the multiplication symbol to re-emphasize.
when I was in your class on Friday, Thursday, I can't remember, and you were working on something very similar to this, but you were modeling it just up on the overhead.
Mm.
And I really think that you practicing this was good because you get to like give them a little chunk of what the bigger piece, well, you know, a small chunk of a bigger piece, and then monitor. Okay, now the next step is, and I want to make sure that everybody has it before we move on.
It's not so overwhelming.
It's not so overwhelming because it's chunked. And
Well,
then
if they get stuck on a part, they can ask questions about that part
Right.
rather than just being like, I don't get any of this.
And then after the modeling
Yeah.
section, then we get to go and do exactly what Kayla did before, and that is give them more at bats, and then they, you know, slowly they get a better like grasp of what they're doing. The time spent doing that, I think is going to be very valuable.
So now, like after you come around, this is where I would emphasize to make sure everyone understands, like how are the two equations different? One is of the total animal count, right, and one is of the total number of legs. Because like
Yeah, and
you
you
could
can
get
even
the
put it
equation,
next
right?
to it.
But,
They
like,
can even put it next
that's
to it.
what I did. I
It's
wrote
like, yeah.
animals and legs.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
but I mean, that would solidify for them. Okay, they're different, but now I need to make them the same, right? And so then, like, do you want to pick up?
Huh?
Now I would pick up with how do I make these two equations, like now that we've all come around and we're all on the same page, how do we make these the same? And you have to get them to distribute the -4.
This where I think the kids are a little bit better. Am I right? Once they have the two
'Cause
equations,
procedurally, they're fine.
procedurally they're pretty good, right? About
We still need more practice on
well,
elimination
yeah, I
substitution.
need more practice with it, but
Right?
like
Oh my gosh.
Americas and another one that I saw right now, you even said it. You used
IG.
substitution instead of elimination, and so
Yeah, and that's why today it's up too, because I really thought they needed more practice with this, and they do. But elimination and substitution, looking at all the papers, I did a certain example that I know I did later, but a lot of people already have an answer that's because you could solve it with substitution with the y or getting the x by itself,
sure.
or you could multiply and get the -4x, or you could get a -2y, which Roxy did. There's like 6 to 8 different ways to do this
Yeah.
problem. So it's like it's good to see that there's different
Yeah,
ways of
little
doing it.
ways to think.
But still,
And they're confident in doing it their own way, which means they're not copying off of a neighbor. Like
Right.
they're actually able to.
Right.
Yeah.
So, Mr. T, how was this practice session and script writing beneficial for you? Okay, go ahead and close it up.
it's beneficial to I don't know. It's just always beneficial to like go back to something that you thought you could have done better on, and just looking at different ways to like annotate, because we know the kids are annotating, but it's not translating to them getting the right equation. So it's like something, finding that misconception, like you're talking about getting the equation right. I mean, obviously illustrations and visuals is something that I'm not a visual learner, but something that is good to be reminded of, because I wouldn't really draw cows or chickens.
I wouldn't have either.
Yeah.
I would have written what Andrade wrote, which is cows are four legs, to like re-emphasize that I know that, but I wouldn't have drawn a picture.
But so many of our kids love to draw and love to
Yeah.
like just doodle on the paper.
Right. Any
It's an
excuse to draw a
opportunity.
cow and a chicken.
It's an
Wait, can I say
opportunity
one
for them
thing?
not to be bored and that kind of thing. Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, whenever I see objectives with real world problems.